Alright, so in this set of videos, we're going to be taking a look at Chapter 7, which is going to be covering arrays and the ArrayList class. So going through this set of videos for this chapter, we're going to be taking a look at precisely what arrays are, what are they used for, what are a few of the different use cases, so maybe some of the different methods or algorithms that we can use them with. And then by the end of it, we're also going to take a look at the ArrayList class to see how we could use that to accomplish essentially the same behaviors, but with a few slight improvements to these traditional arrays. So the first thing we're going to get started with is going to be this introduction to arrays. So we'll take a look at what they are, how we can actually put these into our program, and just a little bit about how to actually set them up and just use them in very simple cases. So there are going to be certain instances where you may want to store a collection of data that all share the same data type. So this could mean something like a set of numbers that you want to keep all kind of grouped together. It could also mean like a collection of names, so maybe a set, or in this case an array of string values. So in cases like this, it's going to be best to use an array. Arrays can hold multiple values. We'll refer to those values as elements of the array, and each one of those will be of the same data type. So the important thing here is to make sure that everything that you store into this array, all those individual elements, all have the same data type. So in the following example, the data type is still going to be an int for the individual elements. So we're going to specify the data type for the array elements, so that'll still show up in the declaration for it. The brackets next to the data type will indicate that this is an array. So if you look at that variable declaration near the bottom, just after this description, you'll see the int, the data type for the individual items or elements, and then that pair of brackets to indicate specifically that this is going to be an int array. We'll then go ahead and still give it a name of some kind. In this case, we're going to call it numbers, and then we'll have our assignment operator, so we've got that equal sign. After that, you will notice the use of the new keyword to construct an array. So it's going to look a little bit like whenever we construct objects of things like the scanner class or maybe the random class. For the constructor, however, an arrays constructor is simply going to be the data type followed by the size contained in brackets. So in this case, we're going to say that we want to construct a new int array whose size is 5, meaning that 5 items or 5 elements can be placed into this array. So then visually, I'll show you kind of what that would look like if you wanted to think about it in memory. So we've got our set of 5 different positions, or these 5 different spots in our array. We're going to start with position 0. So if you recall with strings, whenever we look at the individual characters of a string, we start at position 0. So arrays have that in common. So whenever we start from the very beginning of an array, we start at position 0. So I've specified that there. We're showing numbers at position 0, number 0. Each one of the individual int values, when we first construct this array, those items will start off being initialized to 0. So we can see at position 0 of this array, the value for it is 0. At position 1, that value is also going to be 0. And then all the way up until we get to the last position, which in this case is going to be position 4. So since we started at 0, the last position is going to be the size minus 1. So let's go ahead and get started on actually putting together a program, and we'll at least get this little bit right here where we're declaring and setting up our int array. So we'll come over to NetBeans. We're going to go ahead and create a new project. So we'll do a new Java application. So for this one, this is going to be my arrays, let's say demo. So this is going to primarily just be the kind of introduction to arrays. So I'll go ahead and remove the extra comments and kind of clean up the style of this. And then inside of the main method, we're just going to go ahead and write in a single line right here. We're going to say int, so that's going to be the data type of the individual items. We'll have a pair of brackets to indicate this is specifically going to be an int array. We'll then give it a name. So we'll call this one numbers. We'll say this is equal to a new int array of size 5. We'll have our semicolon. And so now we have that entire line there where we are declaring and also assigning some newly constructed array called numbers. So coming back over here. So I've mentioned this already. We'll take note of the fact that the positions, the indices of an array are going to be 0-based. So another way we can describe these positions, so like the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, we could also say that each one of those is going to be an index of the array in much the same way that you would describe, maybe the table of contents for a book. You'd say that there's a particular index for it. Keep in mind that the start of the array is going to be at position 0. So then if we want to go ahead and start assigning values to each one of those locations, so after we've constructed the array, the individual positions can be accessed using the following syntax. So this first line right here is going to be assigning the value 20 at position 0 of the array. The next line after that is going to be assigning the value 30 at position 3 of the array. So we can see those lines right there. Number 0 equals 20, numbers 3 equals 30. And then I've also included that same visual representation of the array, but now showing what it's going to look like after you've started assigning some values to it. So at position 0, we're going to see the value 20 stored there. And then at position 3, we're going to see the value 30 stored there. So if we wanted to, we could go ahead and come back over to our example that we're working on, and we can go ahead and add those two lines as well. So after we've constructed our array, go ahead and say numbers. So we're going to use the name of the array right here, and then we'll specify the position in brackets. So keep in mind there's a couple of different ways that we're using these brackets. When you see them right here next to the data type, that just indicates that we're specifically going to be using the int array type. When you see the brackets right here, this is just used as part of the constructor to indicate the size of the array. So that's usually when it comes right after the new keyword. And then whenever you've already got your array constructed, if you see the brackets again, kind of like this, then the thing that you're specifying is going to be a particular position of the array. So in this case, we're specifying position 0 of our numbers array, and we want to put the value 20 into that. Additionally, we're going to go ahead and do numbers and get position 3. So this would be, position 3 would be the 4th spot from our perspective. We're going to go ahead and put the value 30 into that one. Okay, so at this point now, our array, if we think about it visually, it would look something like what we have right here. So there are going to be a few different ways that we could declare and initialize our array. So the way that I just showed it is a pretty standard convention for declaring it, where you specify the brackets next to the data type, since you want to be very explicit about the fact that it is an int array. But you could also specify the brackets next to the variable name rather than the data type on declaration. If you do this, keep in mind I've got two different examples of doing this. The first one shows it if you have just a single data type. The second one shows it if you have multiple data, if you have just a single variable. The second line shows it if you have multiple variables where you have to include the brackets after each one of them to indicate that each one of those is going to be treated as an array. Whereas alternatively, if you were doing something like this and you specified the brackets next to the data type, you would only have to do it in that one instance. So ideally, this is another one of the many reasons why it is that it's usually best to just go ahead and do all of your declarations on separate lines rather than having a kind of comma-separated list like this. And the standard convention is to typically place the brackets next to the data type. So while you can do it this way, it's usually encouraged that you just go ahead and place the brackets next to the data type. Another thing we can take a look at, the individual values for your array can be specified on initialization instead of specifying a new array of some size. So in this particular case, we see our int array days is going to be equal to, and then we've got a list with 12 different values for the number of days for each month of the year, and then that's going to be surrounded with these curly braces. So those curly braces that you see around it, in this particular context, those are used to indicate the beginning and end of an array initialization. And of course, the order that you put these in, that determines which position of the array they're going to be placed in. So the 31 at the very beginning is at position 0, the 28 will be at position 1, and then so forth and so on. And then also, the number of items that you specify when you do this determines what the size of the array is going to be. So because we put 12 numbers into this initialization, that means that our array is going to be of size 12. So if we want, we can go ahead and take a look at that as well. We'll go ahead and create our int array called days. This is going to be equal to that list of days of months of the year. So we've got 31, 28, and then 31, 30, 31. Should be 31, 30, 31, 31. Like this. Yeah, okay. So we'll have our 31 at position 0, 28 position 1, another 31 at position 2, and then so forth and so on for each one of the different days and for each one of the different months of the year. Okay. So before I get into this next part, there's one additional thing I want to go ahead and do. So just to make sure that we understand this syntax here for putting some values into our array, I also want to go ahead and take a moment to demonstrate printing out those values to the console. So we're going to go ahead and do a quick print statement right here. We'll go ahead and say something like system.out.println, and then we'll go ahead and just put in something like numbers 0. We'll go ahead and save that. And if we go ahead and run this, then we're going to go ahead and print out the value that is stored at that particular location of our array. So in this case, when we run this, we're specifically going to print out the value 20, since that's at position 0. We'll go ahead and do one more of these. In this case, we'll do numbers 3. Go ahead and save that. And so then if we run it, we get the 20 from number 0, and this 30 from numbers 3. Okay, so now that we've seen that, we're going to go ahead and try to expand on this idea of adding values and then printing those values from an array. So since the indices of an array are set up in this incrementing fashion, we go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then carrying on depending what the size of the array happens to be. Stepping through each position of the array can easily be achieved by using a for loop. So the loop counter that we use for our for loops can now also serve as the current index of the array, or the current position of the array. So the following example is going to use two for loops. The first for loop is going to be used to populate the array with some values provided through user input, and then the second is going to be used to print the contents of the array back to the console. So we can see a few lines of code right here at the very beginning. We're just going to go ahead and declare our keyboard object. So we have an object of the scanner class that we are using with system.in, so we're reading from keyboard input. We've then got that same array declaration where we're declaring our numbers array, be of type int. We again will specify that it's going to be an array of size 5. So then for our two for loops, we're going to start at position 0. So we're going to say for int. In these particular cases, we're going to refer to the loop counter as index, since that's the primary purpose that it's meant to serve in these loops, is to specify a particular index or position in our array. So that index is going to start at 0, since our arrays start at position 0. And we're going to keep going for as long as it is less than the size of the array. And since our update for this is going to be to just increment it, so we're doing index plus plus, this means that we're going to go through the values 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So those 5 values are going to be the 5 different positions of our array. So let's go ahead and put all of this together so we can see what that looks like. So right here, what I'm going to go ahead and do is comment out these 2 lines, since we're going to let the user enter their own values for each one of the different lines, or for the different positions. I'll also go ahead and comment out these 2 lines since we're only going to be printing out the 5 values that the user gives us. So at the very top of this program, I want to go ahead and include an import statement to bring in the scanner class. So we're going to do import java.util.scanner. Save that. Right here at the beginning of my main method, we'll go ahead and create that keyboard. So we're going to do scanner, keyboard is equal to a new scanner. It's going to be reading from system.in. Go ahead and save that. And then right here, so after we've constructed our array, the next thing we want is going to be our for loop, where we're asking the user to provide some values. We can go ahead and just assign those to each one of the different positions. So what we're going to go ahead and do is just say for int index equal to 0. And while that index is less than 5, so as long as it's less than whatever the size of the array happens to be, we're just going to increment it. And right here, what we're going to do, we can go ahead and do 2 lines of code for this. The first one is with the request to the user to enter a value. And then the second one is going to be where we actually take their input and store that at a particular position. So we're going to say system.out.print. I'll say please enter a value to insert into the array. And then right here, what we need to go ahead and do is we want to get the numbers array. So we're going to specify that. And then inside of the brackets, we need to specify the current position that we're at. And because we're doing this with a for loop, we know that this index that we're incrementing each time, that's going to continuously change as we go through each iteration of this for loop. So we can actually go ahead and use this index right here. And so this index, the first time that we go through this for loop, is going to be 0. The next time around, it's going to be 1, and then it's going to be 2, and then 3, and then 4. So as we continue to iterate over this for loop, this index is constantly being updated so that it is whatever the current position of the array happens to be. So this essentially allows us to step through each position of the array. And so then what we want to go ahead and do is the same thing we had right here, where we're just assigning some value to a particular position. And the way that we're going to do that is by getting it from the user. So we're going to say our keyboard right here. And we're going to call the next int method. So we're just going to get the next integer value that the user provides to us. And we're going to assign that to a specific index or a specific position in our numbers array. The next thing we're going to go ahead and do, let's go ahead and do that a little bit lower where print statements happen to be. So right around here. Keep my alignment. Right here, we'll go ahead and include the other for loop for the print statements. So let's go ahead and say something like for. Again, we're going to do int index equal to 0. So we'll just reuse the same variable that we had up here in this new for loop scope. Right here, we'll say index less than 5. So again, just making sure that we keep going for as long as it's less than the size of the array. Do index plus plus. And for this one, I just need a single line of code for this one, so I won't worry about including curly braces for the body of this for loop. Instead, I'm just going to put in my one print statement right here. And for this one, I just want to go ahead and print out each one of the numbers in the same way that I did right here. So we know that we need the numbers array. And again, we can just go ahead and use this index right here to step through each one of the different positions, since index is constantly being updated due to this condition right here. So go ahead and save that. And so then if we go ahead and run this, so now we're going to see please enter a value to insert into the array. So this first value that I put in is going to be what's inserted at position 0. So let's say I do something like all the different power or multiples of 10. So we'll start with 10. So we'll get that again. This one's going to be at position 1. So we'll do 20. This is going to be at position 2. We'll do 30. This one will be at position 3. Go ahead and do 40. And then this one will be at position 4. I'll go ahead and do 50. And then it'll go ahead and print those back out to the console to me. So this is going to be the 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. So that's at position 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. So now that we've seen all that, the last thing that I want to wrap up with on this introduction to arrays is making sure that we keep in mind that arrays start from 0 and then go up to an index equivalent to the length of the array minus 1. So I have kind of repeated this a couple of times. I could say with a great deal of certainty that eventually you will make this mistake. Even I've made this mistake on occasions, where you're going to accidentally start from 1, or you're going to accidentally kind of keep going until you hit the size of the array, or you try to specify some index that is not within that range of 0 up to the length minus 1. And if you should happen to do this, you're going to get an exception. So you'll get some kind of error message printing to your console that will say something like this index out of bounds exception. So in this example right here, we can see that happening. We've got our int array called values. It's going to be equal to a new int array of size 3. So that means the positions for it should be 0, 1, and 2. But on the next line, we're trying to access position 3, which is outside those bounds or outside that range. And so when we try to assign something to that position, we're going to get this error telling us that our index is out of bounds. We also have a for loop right here that does kind of the same thing, but now we're seeing the problem on both ends. We accidentally started our index from 1 and we ended it on 3. So in this case, we would be missing the 0th position or the 0th index. So we just don't do anything with that particular position. And we're going to end up getting the index out of bounds exception because we tried to access 3, which is outside the bounds of the range that we set initially. So we can go ahead and take a quick look at this as well, just to see what that looks like. So let's say that right here, I accidentally did something like less than or equal to 5. I go ahead and save that. And so now when I run this, what's going to happen is this program will work correctly up until it finally sees the point where I try to access a position that doesn't or isn't allowable. It's not within that range. So this is going to work for the first 5 positions that I had already, but then it's going to go to the 6th position. So that would be position 5 right here. And when it tries to access that position, that's when that exception is going to be thrown. So we'll try this. I'll just go ahead and give this the same values as before. So we'll do 10, 20, 30, 40, and then 50. And so now when I push enter, it's going to give me the message for it right here. So it's going to do this, and it's going to be waiting right here. But the problem in a second is when it tries to fully execute line 16, it actually tries to assign a value here. That's when the error is going to occur. So if I try to do 60, then we get this error right here. So it's going to say my array index out of bounds exception right here. It's going to specify the position that I tried to access, which was 5. It'll also tell me a little bit more about it. Say like right here, it'll tell me precisely what line number I tried to do that on. So it's warning me that on line 16, I made this mistake. Of course, obviously, line 16 is where the error specifically occurred, but that's not necessarily the part that's actually wrong with our program. Technically, this line is fine. The real issue is right here. So whenever you see this array index out of bounds exception, just double check the range that you specified. Assuming that you're doing this with a for loop, just double check this range, or if it's based on maybe some kind of input, you just have to double check this value you specified in the brackets right here. Okay, so at this point, this is going to wrap up everything for the introduction to arrays. Took a little bit of a look at populating the array using a for loop and then being able to print those values out, and also considered a little bit about actually initializing and declaring arrays and making sure that we avoid this index out of bounds exception. In the next video, we're going to start taking a look at a little bit more with actually doing some processing with our arrays. So we'll look at it a little bit more with performing some kind of numeric calculations using our arrays.